Now, let's move on with our stage program. Today, we are going to talk now about defense and the new Defence VC Playbook. In fact, so I've been a tech journalist for more than 15 years now, and it's been just a few years since we actually started talking about defense tech and VC in one sentence. It used to be an absolute no-go zone for most venture capital funds, and you would not really hear much about it, leave alone read in some of the biggest journalistic outlets. But now, of course, it is totally changed, and these days venture capital is, I would say, in many ways it shapes the next generation of defense technology across the world, and specifically across Nordic Baltic 8 and wider Europe. And this next panel will look into where this capital is actually flowing to and what it takes for European defense startups to scale. So I'm very happy to invite to this stage our next panel. Please meet our panelists, Niels Carlsen, the founding partner at Final Frontier. Final Frontier, and I love the naming, is going to get even better. It is a Danish VC fund focusing on early-stage startups in defense, space, and cyber in the Nordic and Baltic region and in Ukraine. And before Final Frontier, Niels also was the general partner in the largest Danish early-stage tech venture capital fund, that was Seed Capital. An interesting fact, by the way, 20 years ago, Niels literally sailed around the world with his wife and 2 kids in a 35-foot yacht. I would not even be able to imagine this, I guess. And he regards this as his own successful startup, which I fully support and very much admire. Niels, please come on stage. Give a warm round of applause to Niels, who is a VC, but also a sailor. Next up, we have Nicholas Nelson, general partner at Archangel. I said the name is going to get better. Archangel is Europe's first defense-first venture capital fund, and it is not his first foray into defense tech. He previously founded Offset Ventures, that is Europe's first defense-focused VC syndicate. Prior to this, Nicholas held senior roles in early-stage venture capital, in strategy consulting in government, including deploying to Afghanistan. Now, Nicholas is also a research fellow at the University of Oxford, also a senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Studies, and a prolific author who's been published in many media outlets across Europe and globally. Please welcome on stage Nicholas Nelson. Next up, to complete the panel, we have Erlend Prestgard, investor at Munkene, the senior director at Cisco, and part of this team of Norwegians who have been conducting pro bono defense tech investments in Ukraine. I would love to hear more about this. He has a background as a founder, as strategist, as consultant, and as a banker. Please welcome Erlend Prestgard. And to moderate and direct this conversation, we have Jesper Hart-Hansen, the founding partner at R.vc. That is a VC fund, once again, with focus on teams with innovative dual-use technologies. He was a co-founder of Global Connect, which many of the people in the room should probably know, which was eventually acquired by EQT. And he spent many years as an equity investor and held a number of board seats as well. Please welcome our moderator for the session, Jesper Hart-Hansen. Now, please do enjoy this conversation with a star-studded panel here. The floor is all yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, dear panelists here, for being here today to talk about the role of Defence VC. I'd like to start and asking you, all of you, if you could come up with an example of the role that Defence VC is having in respect to the winning of the war in Ukraine, the rebuild of the European defense, as much as doing a return on investment to your investors by picking the right technologies and the right winners. And why don't you start here, Erlend?
I can try. I would maybe want to separate this into what's generic and what's specific. Generic is, of course, to be the private allocator of capital to where it makes sense. And I think that's VC's job in general, and I think we see that as an important purpose here. And then I think to try to help these companies with the VC toolbox. And I think that's the obvious stuff. I think what we find in Ukraine is a few nuances that are interesting. I think everything is at a speed which is very different. So I think VC, I think the market is moving faster than the VCs in Ukraine. And certainly European VCs are, I would actually say, quite bad at moving at the pace of the market. So I think we have a big job to do to increase our own speed and hence then even increase the Ukrainian startup speed even further. And the second nuance is, I think, given the nature of Ukraine's startup ecosystem, they're often very young founders and quite inexperienced founders, but often deep tech and very ambitious. I think a lot of this kind of being an expert network broker, we find to be a very small thing, but with big impact thing that we can do. So.
Nicholas.
No, I think it's a really good question. Obviously something that we consider quite a bit. I think first and foremost, VC is about fundamentally, including and especially Defence VC, fundamentally about two things, and two things only. For us, can you identify and invest in companies that are creating net new or differentiated capabilities that have mission impact? But second, and I would say equally as important, if not more so, that a lot of people new to defense make the mistake on, is can you generate outsized returns for your limited partners? That's all that matters at the end of the day. Now, VC is not grant funding. VC is not about investing in technology or companies because it's the right thing to do. Sure, that is a good motivating factor for some angel networks out there and for others, but fundamentally this is an asset class like any other, and if you want to raise institutional capital, if you want to have long-term impacts, you have to balance those things. It cannot just be about LP returns, but it should be a very important bit. At the same time, you can't just say we want to have mission impacts and not worry about follow-on or not worry about investing in things that are actually venture scalable, because in a good company or a good technology, in most cases, not just many, most cases, especially in defense, is not inherently venture scalable. And a lot of people view venture capital almost as a hammer. And when you have a hammer, everything you look for is a nail. And that's the big differentiation out there. Now, the second part of your question, which is what is Defence VC, or what I would say, what do you need to be credible in Defence VC? It's really three things. First, fundamentally, I think you need defense expertise fundamentally in this, that you have lived those experiences, you've been end user or a warfighter, or you've had that direct hands-on experience. I think that gives you the network and indeed the credibility when dealing with founders, but also with our partners in ministries or departments of defense. Second, I think you need the technical acumen to be able to evaluate these technologies, build out prioritized roadmaps, and things of that ilk. While it's something I've always been somewhat good on, I have a great partner in Dr. Daniel Carew, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, who is a PhD in engineering and has been doing this for decades. And you really fundamentally need that understanding of how the technology works, how it's going to integrate, and how it's going to evolve over time. Third and finally, and I know this is the boring bit for folks, but you need a track record. You need an institutional track record of identifying the right companies, securing allocation in there, making those investments, and then having the clear results. We've done that out of our current fund, but I think also you look at track records being really important. We now have 9 different, between myself and Dr. Daniel Carew, we now have 9 different unicorns in our past portfolios. And I think those things, as you look for building not just a defense fund for now, but one that's going to exist after this hype cycle dies down, and it will, longevity in the space.
Thank you. Niels?
Yeah, you're super difficult acts to follow, so I could just say I second everything. But I would add to on the generalist point, I think to me, starting this fund has been very mission-driven. I think we have an important role to play and in building up, let's say, Europe's strength and capability, and also helping Ukraine win this war. And why do I think a VC plays a role in that? And I think over time, private capital has shown itself as an amazing accelerator of innovation and let's say a tool with which you can create improved innovation and competitiveness in a given industry, whatever the industry. And in defense, when you look at it, I look at both defense, space, and cyber, everything woven together. Like the theme of this conference, very much so in cognitive, but across all these areas, there is a lack of, let's say, competitiveness, especially in Europe, but actually in the entire Western world. We have too few incumbent companies controlling much of the sector, and there's very little innovation. And I think, so I know that this is sort of on maybe a slightly different level, but still I think the general role of a VC here is to make sure that we disrupt that system. And by disrupting that system, we also make money and returns for our investors, which is, of course, on the generalist level, another, if you will, otherwise you do not have a right to play, if you will. So we can do good while making money, and both things need to be in order for me to think this is an interesting sector to be in. And I think, so there is a really important role to play for a VC, and I think, so this is on a very top level, but also for the companies we invest in. I have the feeling that most of the companies we've been allowed to invest in, they like that mission and mirror themselves in it and want to work with people who actually feel that this is an important mission we are on. At the same time, they also respect the fact that we need to make money for our investors. And that brings us then to the second thing, how do you work concretely with these companies? I mean, you take the VC toolbox that you said, Erlend, and you take some of the stuff that you mentioned on the network and the experience collaboration, and you try to find a way. I was not recently, it's always 1.5 years ago, oh my God, time runs, but I was at a conference where the Klaus Hommels, founding partner of Lakestar and NATO Innovation Fund chairman at that time, I don't know if he still is actually, but he had this comment on the stage that he was tired of listening to startups complaining about procurement problems because, you know, that's just as it is. And as a good startup, you need to fix that. You need to push through these barriers. And again, this is where we as a VC can come in with the mindset that yes, barriers can be removed and changed. And so if I might use a military metaphor, I think the VC in that role, especially early stage VC, which I love and find really interesting, is like a special forces operation. You need to break down walls. Then afterwards, we can always have the PEs and the banks and the larger guys. They come in when the spreadsheets are the dominating tool. Where we operate, the dominating tool is the hammer to break down the walls, to make sure that things change in the sector. And I think by doing that, we can help create a new defense industry. And if we do that, there will be money to be made on the second point.
Thank you very much. I'd like to actually dive into what VCs are investing in, which is the people. There's not much of a balance sheet at the point of time when you are investing. And when we're doing Defence VC, we are relying on the founders on creating the value. We are minority shareholders. And because it's Defence VC, this is not just for fun. So what is your reflections on how to do the due diligence on the founders in respect to securing that the technology that you are developing together with the founders are not ending up in the wrong hands eventually? Winning the war in Ukraine is a short term, but there is a high risk during the 10 years. And do you have anything to share with us in respect to doing a due diligence on the morality of the founders you're investing in?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, if I may, with early stage, the technology is important. Make no mistake about that. Finding the right niche or the right problem to solve is really critical. But more so, in my view, especially given that the average pre-seed founder pivots 2.7 times across a large asset, you have to anticipate whoever these founders are, they're going to have to be flexible, but also effectively willing to run through a wall. And so when we look at that, we do have 14 key criteria differently weighted, as all VCs will have their own rubrics or scoring matrix. But the biggest thing we look for is how believable is their story, how resilient are they as human beings, what their why fundamentally is, and then how they reference checkout. And I'll say most of our founders, or at least in the case of co-founders, at least one of them, do tend to come from either their respective governments or the uniformed services. So we are lucky enough to have strong networks where we don't just take their word for it, we also find old colleagues of theirs who served with them, who overlapped with them, say in a deployed environment, and really go into the weeds on those reference checks, because effectively that's what we're betting on. Yes, we're betting on them being a smart, talented individual, but also in this case, one who is willing to take the hard road and do it the right way, or as to your point, the moral way. Now, there's no 100% solution and there's no way for a VC to ensure long-term that a certain technology will not find its way into adversarial hands. What you can do is find the founders who are going to have that moral guidance and that personal compass to drastically lower that chance, and then to work with them and future investors to maintain a positive cap table and good investors who have sourced money from the right places and also have similar networks and trustworthiness in there, which is even a more complicating factor. And we see that with adversarial capital constantly trying to penetrate the supply chain of venture. And there are a number of funds well known in Europe who do have active money from things tied to the CCP or things tied to Russian oligarchs. And we keep seeing that even from funds that are well known in the daily TechCrunch articles or formerly TechCrunch, and others that get highlighted in the mainstream media, not so much the defense, but then you go, well, I know for a fact there's already adversarial capital on there. Now, it's not necessarily a critical risk in the moment, but can be longer term and can definitely evolve into that.
Thank you. I'll actually jump to another subject just to make sure that we cover a little bit more during the short time, if you don't mind here. Because one of the subjects is that Ukraine has recently voted through a new law in respect to intellectual property, IP, and the protection of IP from the Ukrainian companies. So they're moving towards Europe. Now, we, as VCs, we have sometimes a strategy of investing in protectable IP if it's a hardware related. And is this relevant in respect to defense, where, you know, do you also invest in respect to looking at intellectual property in and maybe Niels, you could maybe answer?
Yeah, I would just like to glue one remark to Nicholas, because that was too deep. But I think the moral fiber is actually super relevant. We actually wrote or tried to write an ethical guidelines for how to assess teams, and I think the one problem is that moral fiber is not something you have a test for. Something you can try to ascertain it through reference tests. And I would really encourage everybody, also when hiring for your teams, that this is in this sector a really important thing. Now, getting back to topic, sorry, I didn't want to skip that, but I think it's an important point. The IP, I mean, I come from software, and so in software you can basically jump IP in a number of ways, but we're now in a sector where IP is relatively critical, and so it is important, and I think it's one reason why you could say that right now, most of the, let's say, institutionally backed VCs invest in only in Ukrainian companies if they have topco outside, is that they can actually shift IP to that topco to the extent possible, and over time build it there. And I am hoping that that's something they are correcting in Ukraine. I'm not sure about the status there, but it is super relevant.
All right, thank you very much. But you had some good points recently that I just want to make sure you reflect to the audience here, is that as we are building the playbook for Defence VC here in Europe, the US has a longer history of Defence VC. And I think, Erlend, you have some points on that you might like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so I think the good thing is, I think some of our colleagues here in Denmark have estimated that about 80% of the VC money that came in, or the startup money, you can say, that went into Ukraine last year is American money. And I think that's great that the Americans are there, and it's a lot better than if they're not there. I am disappointed in Europe's ability to not be there. Deeply disappointed, and also at the reason why some of us are engaged in this. And I think the Americans are just better at this than we are. I think they're more willing to take risk. They're more focused on the key things as opposed to all the criteria. They move faster. They have more capital. And in a situation where Ukraine is the one protecting Europe, I do not see it. I don't see it as us taking the responsibility we need to take. So I think we have a lot to learn from them, and then I think we can bring aspects to the table that are of value. But right now, it's a catch-up game for us to play the role that we, I would say, are morally obliged to, and practically. What's the English word? Compelled to, or something like that. So I think we have a lot to do. We're far behind where we need to be, I think I use these two numbers sometimes, that I think Helsing last year in their Series D raised 600 million euros, or about $700 million at the time. And the entire Ukrainian defense tech ecosystem raised, depending on your source, $105 to $125 million. And with no discredit to Helsing, that's not my intention. I'm just saying kind of a 6 to 7 times ratio between an entire ecosystem of hundreds of companies and kind of one, in this case European, you can do even more with the US. There is something that is completely off here in my regard.
Right, and thank you for mentioning that Helsing is one of the European unicorns in respect to value of the company, but as we were discussing before we got on stage here, eventually we'll be measured on the ability to return the capital to the investors, called DPI. And if we do, I'll ask the audience here, how many of you believe that we, from the Baltic area, the new Nordics of the 8 countries, that we would have a unicorn company being developed over the next couple of years that comes out of this region? And it's not based on valuation, but it's based on actually real customer returns and investor return. How many of you believe that will come from our region here? Yeah. So it's a little bit like 50-50, so that's it's an in between here. Do you have one sector that you would like us to know that this is where this unicorn will come from? If you had to choose one, which is difficult, but do that as a final note here to the audience of where would you believe that this could come from, this area, technology area?
It's super difficult because as an investor, I'm actually, and I hate to say this word, but I'm pretty opportunistic, and I would say that across these new domains of defense, the founders know better than me and any expert panels what actually will move the needle, and they will appear. So I may be completely, but a couple of sectors I really like. I must admit I'm intrigued, and we might also play into what are the Nordics good at. And I do think we have very transparent societies where we're good at handling information. So maybe in the cognitive space, we might have a unicorn popping up in that region. That could be one sector, which I'm definitely looking for. I think it's a very interesting area. The business models are completely out of whack and difficult to handle, but we need to fix that.
One.
I can't say no.
Nicholas.
No, I think it's a great question. Oftentimes, to the point about the US market and having spent half my life in both markets, there's a understandable desire to try to compare them and take some of the lessons learned, but not all of them are applicable. And that's why I'm going to kind of dive into what I think is the next area for a unicorn to emerge from this new Nordics area. And fundamentally, a lot of people try to be the everything shop. They try to be the Anduril or Palantir of Europe. And fundamentally, I don't believe that's actually going to happen. What I think you're going to find, instead of neo-primes, so companies trying to service all 5 warfighting domains eventually, and yes, prime does mean something. I'll happily give anyone a long diatribe on that after this panel. But at the same time, you have these ones who are very what I call narrow primes. So they are priming a specific warfighting domains and able to grow out of them. A great example of this would be a company like ICEYE, who my partner was one of the first investors in one of his prior funds, and others who are going to be focused on a single modality or single int source and able to own that and part of the integration picture into things like joint operating environments, or indeed that solve a current unmet or future unmet need in the battle space. So more to come in that one, because we have an investment we just closed in Finland that we're really excited about, but that won't come out for another 2 weeks. But otherwise,
so space.
So we have to.
I mean, I'm pretty bullish on space. You know that. So
I'll do a quick one.
1 minute to also, if you have one area, technology area, you would like us to be aware of.
So I think it'll actually be very different for Ukraine and for Nordics and Baltics, because Ukraine, you can do volume at low margin and get there. In the Nordics, I don't think you can do the same. So in the Nordics, I think you're going to have to do something that you can sell in peacetime at volume. So the satellite thing is, the obvious thing for me as well. Deep domain at scale, maybe components. It's going to be deep tech component that can also be used in civilian life.
Thank you.
I don't actually know which domain. Ukraine is going to be 10 different ones.
Okay.
But Jesper, in your closing
Now-
remarks, you might mention maritime and Arctic.
Very good. Now you've given it some thoughts, right? So I'll just round it off because lunch is ready for us. But we've been writing the Defence VC book as we speak, and I like to say that Defence VC is there. It's not simply about the returns, but it's also about the relevance, allocating capital to change agents for protecting our democracies. So with that in mind, let's go for lunch.